She lay there, unable to move, unable to speak, trapped inside a body that had become her prison. The doctors said she would never wake up. They whispered it right there in front of her, as if she were already gone. But she could hear everything. Every word, every breath, every lie. And what her husband said next, standing over her hospital bed while she fought to survive, would change everything. Not just for her, but for everyone who thought they knew the truth about their perfect marriage. This is the story of a woman who died twice. Once in a car that plunged 300 feet off a cliff on one of the most dangerous roads in America. And once in a hospital room where the man who promised to love her until death do them part revealed exactly how far he was willing to go to make sure death came sooner rather than later. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, 33 years old, billionaire heiress, founder of a biotech empire that revolutionized cancer treatment, married to tech titan David Harrison, creator of one of the world's most sophisticated artificial intelligence security systems. Together, they were worth $8.7 billion. Forbes called them the power couple of the decade. Vanity Fair photographed them at their Malibu estate. The world watched them with envy and admiration. The perfect life, the perfect love, the perfect lie. Because on October 15, 2023, at exactly 9:47 in the evening, Sarah's black Tesla Model S went through a guardrail on Mulholland Drive and dropped 300 feet into a canyon that had claimed 17 lives in the past decade. First responders found her barely alive, her body shattered, her skull fractured, her lungs collapsed. David was not in the car. He was 40 miles away at a business dinner with investors, his alibi airtight, his shock and grief seemingly genuine. But what Sarah heard in that hospital room, trapped inside her own broken body, would expose a conspiracy so calculated, so cold-blooded, it would shake Silicon Valley to its core and reveal that sometimes the person sleeping next to you is the one planning your funeral. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is not a story about a car accident. This is a story about what happens when love becomes a business transaction, when marriage becomes a murder plot, and when a woman who was supposed to die finds herself in the most terrifying position imaginable, fully conscious but completely paralyzed, listening as the people around her discuss whether she will ever wake up and what will happen if she does. The questions that haunted the investigators who would eventually take on this case were simple but chilling. Was the accident really an accident, or was it attempted murder disguised as a tragic mishap on a road known for claiming lives? Why would a man who seemed to have everything, wealth, success, a beautiful wife, want her dead? And what did Sarah discover while lying in that hospital bed, unable to move a single muscle, unable to alert anyone that she was still there, still listening, still fighting? The answers would take months to uncover. They would involve secret bank accounts, hidden affairs, falsified documents, and a conspiracy that reached far beyond one marriage. But it all started with a woman who refused to die and a truth that refused to stay buried. Sarah Mitchell did not come from money. She built it. Raised in a small town in rural Ohio by parents who worked double shifts to keep food on the table, she watched her mother battle breast cancer for 6 years before losing the fight when Sarah was only 16. Her father, a factory worker who never finished high school, died of a heart attack 2 years later, leaving Sarah alone with nothing but student debt and a promise she had made to her mother on her deathbed. She had promised to make something of herself, to do something that mattered, to save lives the way the doctors had tried and failed to save her mother. Sarah worked 3 jobs to put herself through the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on ramen noodles and black coffee, pushing herself beyond what most people thought was humanly possible. She graduated top of her class with a degree in bioengineering and immediately founded a startup focused on targeted cancer therapies using nanotechnology. The scientific community laughed at her. Venture capitalists refused to meet with her. She was 26 years old, a woman in a male-dominated field, with an idea that seemed more like science fiction than viable business. But Sarah had something that no amount of money could buy. She had desperation. She had purpose. And she had the memory of her mother's face in those final days, ravaged by a disease that conventional treatments could not stop. 3 years later, her company, MitoCure Therapeutics, had developed a treatment that extended the lives of stage 4 pancreatic cancer patients by an average of 14 months. The FDA fast-tracked approval. Major cancer centers began clinical trials. Investment banks that had rejected her now fought to take her company public. At 29 years old, Sarah Mitchell became a billionaire when Medocure went public at a valuation of $2.1 billion. She did not spend the money on yachts or private islands. She funded children's hospitals. She endowed cancer research centers. She created scholarships for students who looked like her younger self, broke and brilliant and desperate for a chance. The media loved her. She was the American dream personified. Self-made, brilliant, compassionate. And then, at a tech conference in San Francisco in the fall of 2019, she met David Harrison. David was everything Sarah was not. Born into wealth, educated at Stanford, connected to the Silicon Valley elite from birth. His father had been an early investor in Google and Facebook. His mother sat on the boards of multiple Fortune 500 companies. David himself had founded Sentinel Systems, an artificial intelligence company that provided cybersecurity for governments and Fortune 100 corporations. He was brilliant, charming, and according to everyone who knew him, absolutely smitten with Sarah from the moment they met. Their courtship was the stuff of fairy tales. Private dinners in Paris. Weekend getaways to his family's estate in Napa Valley. A proposal on a beach in Santorini where he had arranged for a string quartet to play while the sun set over the Aegean Sea. They married in June of 2021 in a ceremony that cost $3 million and was attended by tech billionaires, Hollywood celebrities, and politicians. The wedding photos appeared in Vogue. The guest list read like a who's who of American power and influence. Sarah wore a custom Vera Wang gown. David cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. Everyone who was there said it was the most beautiful wedding they had ever seen. Everyone said they had never seen two people more in love. But love, as Sarah would learn, is not always what it appears to be. And sometimes the person who cries at your wedding is the same person who will plan your funeral. The first year of marriage was, by all outward appearances, perfect. Sarah and David bought a $12 million estate in the Pacific Palisades with views of the ocean and the Santa Monica Mountains. They appeared together at charity galas and tech conferences. They were photographed holding hands at Lakers games and premieres. Forbes ran a cover story calling them the power couple redefining Silicon Valley. But behind the closed doors of their mansion, cracks were beginning to show. Sarah's best friend since college, Jennifer Chun, would later tell investigators that Sarah had stopped returning her phone calls about 6 months after the wedding. When Jennifer finally reached her, Sarah seemed distant, distracted. She made excuses for why they could not meet for their usual monthly dinners. She said David thought Jennifer was too negative, too critical of their relationship. Jennifer pressed her. She asked if everything was okay. Sarah hesitated, then said everything was fine, just busy with work. But Jennifer knew Sarah well enough to hear what she was not saying. Something was wrong. Sarah's executive assistant at Medocure, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez who had worked with Sarah for 5 years, noticed changes too. Sarah had always been meticulous about her schedule, her finances, her business decisions. But starting in early 2023, about 18 months after the wedding, Sarah began asking strange questions. She wanted copies of all financial documents related to her personal accounts. She asked Lisa to compile a list of every joint investment she and David had made. She requested information about offshore banking regulations and prenuptial agreement enforcement. Lisa asked if there was a problem. Sarah said no, just doing some financial planning. But Lisa had been with Sarah long enough to know when she was being lied to. Then, in September of 2023, just 6 weeks before the accident, Sarah did something that would prove crucial to the investigation that followed. She hired a private investigator. 10 to 20 hours. The day everything changed. His name was Robert Martinez, a former FBI agent who had spent 20 years working financial crimes and white-collar investigations before retiring and opening his own private investigation firm in Los Angeles. Sarah contacted him through an encrypted email account and paid him a $50,000 retainer in cash. She told him she needed him to look into her husband's business dealings. She suspected David was hiding something. She did not know what. But her instincts, the same instincts that had built a billion-dollar company from nothing, were screaming that something was very, very wrong. Martinez spent 4 weeks following David, analyzing his financial records, tracking his movements, interviewing people in his professional and social circles. What he found was worse than Sarah had imagined. David's company, Sentinel Systems, was not the thriving success everyone believed it to be. It was hemorrhaging money. A failed contract with the Department of Defense had cost the company $47 million. A lawsuit from a former business partner was threatening to expose that much of Sentinel's proprietary technology had been stolen from a competitor. David had been covering the losses by taking out loans using his and Sarah's joint assets as collateral. He had opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He had been moving money in ways that suggested he was preparing for something. Bankruptcy, divorce, or something worse. But that was not all Martinez found. He also found Elena Vasquez, 31 years old. Stunning. A supposed business consultant who had been working with David on what he claimed was a new venture capital fund. Except Martinez's surveillance showed that Elena was not consulting on business. She was having an affair with David, and it had been going on for over a year. Martinez documented everything. Photos of David and Elena at romantic restaurants in Santa Barbara. Security footage from a luxury apartment in downtown Los Angeles that David was renting under a shell company. Bank records showing David had been paying Elena's rent, her car payments, her credit card bills. Text messages recovered from phone records that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Martinez compiled it all into a comprehensive report and delivered it to Sarah on October 14, 2023, one day before the accident. Sarah's reaction, according to Martinez, was not what he expected. She did not cry. She did not rage. She sat in his office, reading through the 100-page report with the same focus and intensity she brought to scientific research. When she finished, she looked up at Martinez and said just 2 words. "Thank you." Then she asked him one question. If David wanted to divorce her, would he lose everything? Martinez explained California's community property laws. In a divorce, David would be entitled to half of everything they had accumulated during the marriage. But Sarah's company, Cure, which she had founded before they married, would remain hers. Her personal fortune, most of which predated the marriage, would remain hers. David would walk away wealthy, certainly, but he would not walk away with billions. He would walk away with millions and a mountain of debt from his failing company. Sarah asked Martinez another question. What if she died? Martinez hesitated. He knew where this was going. If Sarah died, and if David was the beneficiary of her estate, he would inherit everything. All of it. Her company, her fortune, her assets. He would not have to split anything. He would not have to expose his failing business. He would simply become one of the wealthiest men in America overnight. Sarah thanked Martinez again. She told him she would be in touch. She paid him an additional $20,000 in cash and asked him to keep digging, to find out if there was anything else she needed to know. Then she left his office, got into her Tesla, and drove back to the mansion she shared with a man who might be planning to kill her. That evening, October 14th, Sarah made 3 phone calls from her downtown office where she had been reviewing contracts for a new Cure clinical trial. All 3 calls were to her attorney, a man named Richard Chun who had handled her business affairs for years. The calls lasted a total of 47 minutes. Richard would later tell police that Sarah wanted to update her will immediately. She wanted to remove David as the primary beneficiary. She wanted to establish a trust that would ensure her fortune went to her charitable foundation and to cancer research. She wanted it done as soon as possible. Richard asked if something had happened. Sarah said she would explain later, but she needed the documents drawn up immediately. She would come to his office first thing Monday morning to sign them. Richard agreed. He said he would have everything ready. That was the last conversation Sarah Mitchell had as a free woman. 23 minutes later, she left her office building. Security cameras captured her walking to her car in the parking garage, alone, carrying her briefcase and her phone. Traffic cameras tracked her Tesla as it headed west on Sunset Boulevard toward Mulholland Drive, the winding road that would take her home to Pacific Palisades. At exactly 9:47 in the evening, a passing motorist called 911 to report that a car had gone through the guardrail on Mulholland Drive near the intersection with Coldwater Canyon. The motorist, a retired nurse named Patricia O'Brien, climbed down the embankment in the dark, following the sound of the car's alarm. She found the Tesla 300 feet down, wrapped around a tree, the front end completely destroyed. She found Sarah in the driver's seat, unconscious, bleeding, her body twisted at angles that made Patricia certain she was already dead. But when Patricia checked for a pulse, she found one. Weak. Irregular. But there. Patricia called 911 again, screaming for them to send paramedics, to send anyone who could help. Then she stayed with Sarah, holding her hand, talking to her, telling her to hold on, telling her help was coming, even though she did not believe Sarah could hear her. First responders arrived 11 minutes later. Fire department, paramedics, highway patrol. They had to use specialized equipment to reach the car. They had to cut Sarah out of the wreckage. Would later testify that he had never seen anyone survive injuries that severe. Sarah's ribs were broken, 3 of them puncturing her left lung. Her skull was fractured in 2 places. Her right leg was shattered. Her spleen was ruptured. She had lost massive amounts of blood. Her blood pressure was almost non-existent. Her breathing was shallow and labored. By the time they got her into the ambulance and started the race to UCLA Medical Center, James Cooper had made peace with the fact that she would probably die before they got there. But she did not die. Sarah Mitchell held on. Her heart kept beating. Her lungs kept pulling in air. And when they wheeled her into the trauma bay at UCLA at 10:38 that night, the emergency room doctor who took one look at her injuries and immediately called for the hospital's top neurosurgeon had only one thought. How is she still alive? They rushed her into surgery. 6 hours of emergency procedures to stop the bleeding, to relieve the pressure on her brain, to repair the damage to her internal organs. When they finally wheeled her out of the operating room at 4:30 in the morning, the surgeon, Dr. Michael Anderson, told the assembled team that Sarah had maybe a 10% chance of survival. And if she did survive, she would almost certainly never wake up. The damage to her brain was too severe. The trauma too extensive. She would spend whatever remained of her life in a vegetative state, kept alive by machines, unaware of the world around her. David Harrison arrived at the hospital at 10:19 that evening, 41 minutes after he was notified of the accident. He had been, according to his statement to police, at a business dinner in downtown Los Angeles with 3 potential investors in a new venture capital fund he was supposedly launching. The investors would later confirm his presence. He had been with them from 7:30 until he received the call about Sarah's accident just after 10. His alibi was airtight. When David walked into the intensive care unit and saw Sarah for the first time, according to the nurse on duty that night, a woman named Carol Williams who had been working in ICU for 32 years, his reaction seemed entirely appropriate for a husband who had just learned his wife might die. He broke down. He sat beside her bed and held her hand and cried. He asked the doctors if she was in pain. He asked if there was anything they could do. He asked if she knew he was there. The doctors told him what they believed to be true. Sarah was in a coma, deep and unresponsive. She could not see, could not hear, could not feel. Her brain activity suggested she was unconscious. The machines were breathing for her. She was, for all intents and purposes, gone. They told David to prepare himself for the worst. They told him that even if Sarah somehow survived, she would never be the woman he married. The damage was too severe. He should start thinking about end-of-life decisions. David asked what that meant. The doctors explained. If Sarah showed no signs of improvement in the next 72 hours, the family would need to decide whether to continue life support or to let her go. David, as her husband and medical proxy, would make that decision. He told the doctors he needed time. He said he could not imagine a world without Sarah. He said he would do anything to bring her back. Carol Williams, the ICU nurse, would later tell investigators that she believed him. She had seen hundreds of families in crisis. She knew what real grief looked like. And in that moment, David Harrison seemed like a man whose world was falling apart. But Carol Williams did not know what the doctors did not know. She did not know that Sarah Mitchell was not in a coma. She was trapped. The medical term is locked-in syndrome, a rare neurological condition where a person is conscious and aware but cannot move or communicate because of complete paralysis of nearly all voluntary muscles in the body except for the eyes. In Sarah's case, even her eyes would not move. She was completely, utterly paralyzed. But she was awake. She could hear the doctors discussing her prognosis. She could hear David crying beside her bed. She could hear the machines breathing for her, the monitors beeping, the nurses checking her vitals. She could hear everything. And she could do nothing. No one knew. The doctors had diagnosed her with catastrophic brain injury and assumed she was unconscious based on her lack of response to stimuli. They did not run the specific neurological tests that might have revealed locked-in syndrome because her injuries were so severe that such a condition seemed impossible. She should have been dead. The fact that she was breathing at all, even with the help of machines, was a medical miracle. The idea that she might be conscious seemed absurd. So Sarah lay there, trapped inside her own body, screaming silently for someone to understand that she was still there, still alive, still aware, still fighting. The first 72 hours were the worst. She listened as doctors told David that her chances of survival were dropping. She listened as they explained that even if she lived, she would likely remain in a vegetative state permanently. She listened as they gently suggested that David might want to consider letting her go. And she listened as David, sitting beside her bed in the quiet hours of the night when he thought no one else could hear, made a phone call that changed everything. It was 3 a.m. on the third day after the accident. October 18th. Sarah had been in the ICU for 61 hours. David had barely left her side, according to hospital records. He slept in the chair next to her bed. He held her hand. He spoke to her softly, telling her he loved her, telling her to come back to him. The nurses thought it was heartbreaking. They thought he was the perfect husband. But at 3:07 in the morning, David stepped out into the hallway. Sarah could hear him through the open door. She heard him dial a number. She heard him speak in a voice she had never heard before. Low, cold, completely devoid of the emotion he had been performing for the past 3 days. He said, "It is me. No, she is not going to wake up." The doctors confirmed it. Brain damage is too severe. Then there was a pause. Sarah could hear a faint voice on the other end, but she could not make out the words. Then David spoke again. "And if she does?" Another pause. Then David's response. The words that confirmed every terrible suspicion Sarah had harbored since reading the private investigator's report. "She will not. But if somehow she does, we will handle it. Just like we planned. The brake lines were perfect. No one suspects anything. The police think it was an accident. Just a tragic accident on a dangerous road." Another pause. Then David again. "The insurance policy pays out in full as long as there is no suspicion of foul play. 50 million. Plus everything else. We just have to wait. Be patient. Play the grieving husband a little longer." Sarah's mind was screaming. She tried to move. Tried to open her eyes. Tried to make any sound that would alert someone that she was hearing this. But her body would not respond. She was a prisoner. And the man she had married, the man she had trusted with her life, had just confessed to trying to kill her. The next night, David brought someone to the hospital. Visiting hours were over, but David had convinced the staff that he needed support, that he could not face this alone. He brought a woman. Sarah heard heels clicking on the tile floor, heard a voice she recognized from the private investigator's surveillance recordings. Elena Vasquez. Elena spoke softly, but Sarah could hear every word. "Are you sure no one suspects?" David's response was calm, confident. "The police think it is an accident. Her brake lines were severed perfectly, just like you said they would be. It looked like metal fatigue, natural wear and tear on a car that had 70,000 miles on it. The mechanic we paid made sure of that." Elena again. "And if she wakes up?" David, irritated now. "She is not going to wake up. Look at her. She is gone. The doctors say her brain is too damaged. Even if her body survives, there is nothing left up here." He must have tapped Sarah's forehead because she felt the pressure, brief and shocking. It was the first physical sensation she had felt since waking up in this nightmare, and it came from the hand of the man who had tried to murder her. Elena, still uncertain. "What about the will? I heard she was meeting with her lawyer the day after the accident." David, dismissive. "She never made it to that meeting. The will stands as is. I inherit everything. Medocure, her foundation, her accounts, all of it. 50 million from the insurance policy is just the beginning. We are talking about $4 billion, Elena. 4 billion. We just have to be patient. Wait for the doctors to tell me it is time to pull the plug. I play the devastated widower. The media covers the tragic loss. And then, in 6 months, maybe a year, you and I take a very quiet trip to somewhere beautiful, and we start our new life together." Sarah wanted to vomit, wanted to scream, wanted to reach out and claw at their faces. But she could do nothing. She was paralyzed, helpless, forced to listen as the two people who had conspired to kill her discussed their future built on her murder. But Sarah Mitchell had not survived a childhood of poverty, her parents' deaths, the brutality of MIT, and the cutthroat world of biotech by giving up when things got hard. She had survived because she was tougher than anyone expected. And lying there in that hospital bed, unable to move, unable to speak, she made a decision. She would survive this too. And she would make sure that David and Elena paid for what they had done. The question was how. She could not move, could not communicate. The doctors believed she was unconscious. David believed she would never wake up. But Sarah had one advantage. She could hear, she could think, and she could wait. On the 6th day after the accident, something changed. Sarah felt a tingling sensation in her right index finger. It was faint, barely there, but it was something. The paralysis, which she had assumed was permanent, might be temporary. Her brain might be healing. Slowly, impossibly slowly, but healing. She focused all her attention on that finger. Try to move it. Nothing happened. She tried again, and again. For hours, she concentrated on nothing else. Move. Please. Move. And then, on the evening of the 7th day, while a nurse was checking her vitals, Sarah felt her finger twitch. It was tiny, a movement so small it might have been a muscle spasm. But the nurse noticed. Carol Williams, the ICU nurse who had been caring for Sarah since the night of the accident, was checking Sarah's for when she saw the finger move. She stopped, stared at Sarah's hand, waited, and then it happened again. A definite twitch of the right index finger. Carol immediately called for Dr. Anderson, the neurosurgeon who had operated on Sarah. He came quickly, examined Sarah, ran a series of tests. He touched Sarah's hand and asked if she could feel it. Sarah, concentrating with every ounce of strength she had left, moved her finger. Once, Dr. Anderson's eyes widened. He asked her to do it again if she could hear him. Sarah moved her finger. Twice, Dr. Anderson looked at Carol Williams and said something that would change everything. She is in there. She is conscious. Within an hour, the hospital had assembled a team of neurologists, trauma specialists, and rehabilitation experts. They ran tests. They confirmed what Dr. Anderson suspected. Sarah was not in a coma. She had never been in a coma. She was suffering from locked-in syndrome, and she was emerging from it. Slowly, painfully, but she was coming back. The first thing Dr. Anderson did was call the police. Because if Sarah Mitchell was conscious, if she had been conscious this whole time, then she had heard everything. And what she had heard might be evidence of attempted murder. Detective Robert Brennan of the Los Angeles Police Department arrived at UCLA Medical Center within 2 hours of Dr. Anderson's call. Brennan was a 28-year veteran of the force, specializing in financial crimes and complex investigations. He sat down with Dr. Anderson and listened as the doctor explained the situation. Then he went into Sarah's hospital room, pulled up a chair beside her bed, and spoke to her as if she were fully present. Because she was. He explained that he understood she could not speak yet, could not move most of her body. But if she could hear him, if she understood what he was saying, he needed her to move her right index finger. Sarah moved her finger. Brennan asked if she had been conscious since the accident. Sarah moved her finger. Brennan asked if she had heard conversations that made her believe someone had tried to kill her. Sarah moved her finger. Twice. Emphatically. Brennan leaned forward and said, "We are going to help you. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Sarah moved her finger. And for the first time since the accident, she felt something other than terror and rage. She felt hope. Detective Brennan worked quickly. He contacted the private investigator, Robert Martinez, whose contact information Dr. Anderson had found in Sarah's phone. Martinez turned over everything. The surveillance photos, the financial records, the evidence of David's affair with Elena Vasquez, the proof that David's company was failing, the life insurance policy David had taken out on Sarah 3 months before the accident, a policy worth $50 million that David had never mentioned to Sarah. Martinez also provided something crucial. The name of the mechanic who had serviced Sarah's Tesla 2 weeks before the accident. Brennan sent a forensic team to the impound lot where Sarah's destroyed car had been taken. They examined the brake system. What they found was damning. The brake line had been severed, but not in a way that would be immediately obvious. It had been cut partially, weakened deliberately, so that it would fail under stress. The kind of stress that comes from driving on a winding mountain road with steep drops and sharp turns. The kind of road like Mulholland Drive. The cut was clean, precise, done with a professional tool. This was not an accident. This was attempted murder. The mechanic, a man named Carlos Mendoza, was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied everything, said he had no idea what the police were talking about. But when Brennan showed him the evidence, when he explained that Sarah Mitchell had survived and was waking up and would be able to testify about everything she had heard, Carlos broke. He admitted that a man matching David Harrison's description had paid him $25,000 in cash to weaken the brake line in a way that would cause failure but look like natural wear and tear. Carlos had not known who the car belonged to, had not asked questions. He just took the money and did the job. He gave Brennan a detailed statement, signed it, and agreed to testify. Now Brennan had evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. But he wanted more. He wanted a confession. He wanted David Harrison on tape admitting what he had done, and he had an idea of how to get it. The plan was simple but required perfect timing. The hospital would continue to treat Sarah, helping her regain movement and speech through intensive therapy. But publicly, officially, David would be told that Sarah was still in a coma, still unresponsive. The doctors would stage a conversation within David's earshot, discussing the need to make a decision about life support. They would plant the idea that Sarah was never going to recover, that the family needed to consider letting her go. And they would wire Sarah's hospital room with hidden cameras and microphones. If David truly believed Sarah was about to die, if he thought he was alone with her, he might say something incriminating. He might confess. It was a long shot. But Brennan had seen criminals do stranger things. On October 26th, 12 days after the accident, Dr. Anderson had a conversation with David Harrison in the hallway outside Sarah's room. The conversation was staged, but David did not know that. Dr. Anderson explained, in a voice heavy with false regret, that Sarah's condition was not improving, that her brain activity remained minimal, that she was being kept alive entirely by machines. He suggested, gently, that David might want to consider what Sarah would have wanted. Would she have wanted to live like this, trapped in a body that would never recover? Or would she have wanted to die with dignity? David, playing his role perfectly, asked if there was any chance she might wake up. Dr. Anderson, following the script Brennan had given him, said the chance was less than 1%. Effectively zero. He said the kindest thing David could do for his wife was to let her go. David thanked Dr. Anderson, said he needed time to think, said he wanted one more night with Sarah before making any decisions. Dr. Anderson agreed, told him to take all the time he needed. And then he walked away, leaving David alone in the hallway. David stood there for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. The hidden microphones in the hallway picked up every word. David said, "It is almost over. The doctors are recommending I pull the plug. I am going to do it tomorrow night. Act devastated for the cameras. Wait a few months. Then we are free." The voice on the other end said something Brennan could not quite make out. Then David responded, "No one knows. The police closed the case. Accidental death on a dangerous road. Happens all the time. We are in the clear." He hung up, took a deep breath, and walked into Sarah's room. What David did not know was that Sarah was not unconscious. She was lying there, listening. Her right hand was now under a blanket, hidden from view, and she had regained enough control to move all 5 fingers. A tablet device was hidden under the blanket, programmed to record everything through a text-to-speech system that would allow Sarah to communicate with the police in real time if necessary. Brennan and 2 other detectives were in an unmarked surveillance van outside the hospital, watching and listening through the hidden cameras. David sat down beside Sarah's bed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he started to speak. What he said in the next 11 minutes would destroy his life. David began by apologizing. He said he was sorry it had come to this. Sorry that things had gotten so complicated. He said he had loved her once. Really loved her. But then her success had overshadowed his. Her company had thrived while his had struggled. Her name was on magazine covers while his was barely mentioned. He had become Mr. Sarah Mitchell, an accessory to her success. And he could not stand it. He said he had met Elena 2 years before he met Sarah. They had been together, planning a future, until he realized that marrying Sarah would make him wealthier than any legitimate business ever could. So he had left Elena, temporarily, and pursued Sarah, courted her, made her fall in love with him, married her. And all the while, he and Elena had been planning, waiting, biding their time until the moment was right. He said the private investigator had been a problem. Sarah had gotten suspicious too early, but the accident had solved that. If Sarah had just died like she was supposed to, everything would have been perfect. But she had survived. And now he had to finish what the crash had started. He said the doctors would declare her brain dead. He would authorize the removal of life support. She would die quietly, peacefully, with him holding her hand and cameras capturing his grief. The media would call it a tragedy. Her foundation would eulogize her. And in a year, maybe two, he and Elena would get married in a private ceremony somewhere far away. He would mourn publicly and live happily in private. He leaned forward and whispered, "You were brilliant, Sarah. You built an empire. But you should have been smarter about who you married. You should have protected yourself. Now everything you built, everything you worked for, it is all mine. And there is nothing you can do about it." Then David did something that sealed his fate. He took Sarah's hand and said, "I am going to tell the doctors to remove life support tomorrow at noon. By tomorrow night, you will be gone, and I will be free." At that exact moment, Detective Brennan and 4 uniformed officers walked into the hospital room. David turned, startled, and saw them. Saw the cameras. Saw the recording equipment. And in that instant, he knew he had been caught. Brennan looked at David and said, "David Harrison, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Sarah Mitchell and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." David tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to claim he had been joking, that he had not meant any of it. But Brennan held up a hand and said, "We have everything. The brake line, the mechanic, the insurance policy, the affair, the financial records. And now we have your confession. You are done." As officers handcuffed David, Brennan walked over to Sarah's bedside. He leaned down and said quietly, "You did it. You survived. And now he is going to pay for what he did to you." Sarah, using every ounce of strength she had regained, moved her fingers. She spelled out 2 words on the tablet device hidden under the blanket. "Thank you." Brennan smiled and said, "No, thank you. You are the bravest person I have ever met." And then he walked out of the room, following the officers as they led David Harrison out of the hospital in handcuffs, past nurses and doctors and patients who stared in shock, past news cameras that had somehow already arrived, past a life that David had built on lies and was now watching crumble in real time. Elena Vasquez was arrested 4 hours later at Los Angeles International Airport. She had been trying to board a flight to Mexico City with 2 suitcases full of cash and a one-way ticket. When police searched the apartment David had been renting for her, they found evidence that tied her directly to the murder plot. Text messages between her and David discussing the brake line sabotage. Emails to the mechanic, Carlos Mendoza, setting up the payment. Records showing that Elena had researched locked-in syndrome and had told David that even if Sarah survived the crash, she would likely be paralyzed and unable to communicate. Elena had planned it all. David had simply been the weapon she used. The trial began 7 months later, in May of 2024. It lasted 6 weeks and was covered by every major news outlet in the country. The evidence was overwhelming. The mechanic testified. The private investigator testified. The financial experts testified about David's failing company and the life insurance policy. The detectives testified about the confession they had recorded in Sarah's hospital room. And then, on the 18th day of the trial, Sarah Mitchell took the stand. She walked into that courtroom slowly, with the help of a cane, her body still recovering from the injuries that should have killed her. She had regained most of her motor functions through months of grueling physical therapy. She could speak again, though her voice was softer than it had been before, changed by the trauma. But she was alive, and she was ready to face the man who had tried to murder her. The prosecution
Your
asked
Honor, members
Sarah
of
to
the jury,
describe
the evidence
what had
clearly
happened.
shows the
She
defendant's
told the
actions were
jury about
deliberate
the
and
private
harmful.
investigator's
We must
report,
hold him accountable.
about learning of David's affair and his failing business, about realizing, too late, that he might be planning something terrible. She described the accident, the terror of going through the guardrail, the pain of the impact, the darkness that followed. And then she described waking up, being trapped, unable to move or speak or alert anyone that she was conscious. She described hearing David confess to the mechanic's sabotage, hearing him discuss her murder with Elena as if she were already dead, hearing him plan her funeral while she lay there helpless. The jury was silent. Several jurors were crying. The judge had to call a recess because the emotion in the courtroom was so overwhelming. When court resumed, the defense attorney tried to cross-examine Sarah, tried to suggest that her memories might be unreliable, that locked-in syndrome could cause confusion, that perhaps she had misheard or misunderstood what David had said. Sarah looked directly at the defense attorney and said, "I heard every word. I was paralyzed, not deaf. I know what he said. I know what he did. And I know that if Detective Brennan and Dr. Anderson had not figured out that I was conscious, David would have killed me." The defense had no response. The trial continued for another week, but the outcome was never in doubt. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 17 minutes. They found David Harrison guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, tampering with a motor vehicle, insurance fraud. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led David out of the courtroom, he looked back at Sarah one last time. She met his eyes and did not look away, did not flinch. She had survived him, and now she would outlive him. Elena Vasquez, in exchange for testifying against David and providing additional evidence about the conspiracy, was sentenced to 40 years in prison. She would be eligible for parole after serving 25. As part of her plea agreement, she had to give a detailed account of how the murder plot had been conceived and executed. She admitted that she and David had been planning to marry before he met Sarah. She admitted that they had seen Sarah's wealth as an opportunity too good to pass up. She admitted that she had researched methods of murder that would appear accidental. She admitted that she had found Carlos Mendoza through a contact in the underground automotive industry and had arranged the payment. She admitted everything, and she showed no remorse. During her sentencing hearing, the judge asked Elena if she had anything to say. Elena looked at Sarah, who was sitting in the gallery, and said, "You should have died. You were supposed to die. The fact that you survived does not make you a hero. It just makes you lucky." The judge, visibly angry, increased Elena's sentence by an additional 5 years for lack of remorse and for threatening behavior. Elena was led out of the courtroom screaming that it was not fair, that Sarah had ruined everything, that David had promised they would be together. Sarah watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just relief that it was over. The investigation into David and Elena's conspiracy uncovered something even more disturbing. They were not the only ones. The FBI, following leads from the financial evidence in Sarah's case, discovered a network of individuals who targeted wealthy spouses for murder disguised as accidents. David and Elena had been in contact with at least 3 other couples who had successfully executed similar plots. One man had killed his wealthy wife in a boating accident. Another had staged a home invasion robbery. A third had poisoned his husband slowly over months, making it look like a terminal illness. The FBI launched a massive investigation that would eventually lead to 17 arrests across 5 states. Sarah's case, and her survival, had broken open an entire criminal conspiracy. She had not just saved herself. She had saved others who might have been targeted. In the year following the trial, Sarah focused on recovery. Physical therapy to regain full use of her body. Psychological therapy to process the trauma of what she had experienced. She moved out of the mansion she had shared with David and bought a smaller, quieter home in Pasadena. She stepped back from her role as CEO of MitoCure, appointing a trusted colleague to run the company while she took time to heal. But Sarah Mitchell was not someone who could stay inactive for long. She had spent her entire life fighting, and now she had a new fight. She founded a nonprofit organization called Second Chance, dedicated to supporting survivors of domestic violence and attempted murder. She used her own money to fund it, and her own story to raise awareness. She testified before
We must address
Congress
these
about the need
inefficiencies
for better
immediately. The
protections
American
for
people are demanding
individuals in
accountability.
abusive
We will not rest
relationships,
until reforms
about
are
the
in place.
warning signs of financial abuse, about the importance of prenuptial agreements and independent financial oversight in marriages. She became an advocate for victims of locked-in syndrome, funding research into better diagnostic tools and treatment options. She endowed a chair at UCLA Medical Center in Dr. Anderson's name, specifically for research into neurological trauma. She funded scholarships for nursing students, in honor of Carol Williams, the nurse who had noticed her finger moving and had alerted the doctors. She turned her trauma into purpose. In interviews, journalists asked Sarah how she had survived, how she had maintained her sanity while trapped in her own body, how she had found the strength to fight back. Sarah's answer was always the same. She said she had survived because she had no other choice. She said she had maintained her sanity by focusing on what she could control, which was her mind. And she said she had found the strength to fight back by remembering her mother, who had fought cancer for 6 years, and had never given up, even when the doctors said there was no hope. She said, "My mother taught me that you keep fighting until there is nothing left to fight for. And I still had everything to fight for. My life, my company, my legacy. I was not going to let David take that from me." 5 years have passed since the accident. David Harrison is currently incarcerated at California State Prison in Lancaster. He has given several interviews from prison, claiming that he was manipulated by Elena, that he never intended for Sarah to die, that the whole thing spiraled out of control. Prison psychologists report that David shows signs of narcissistic personality disorder and a complete inability to accept responsibility for his actions. He has appealed his conviction 3 times. All 3 appeals have been denied. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. Elena Vasquez served 8 years of her 40-year sentence before being granted early release for cooperation with federal authorities in the broader investigation into the murder-for-profit network. Upon release, she was immediately deported to Spain, her country of birth. She is prohibited from ever returning to the United States. Recent reports indicate that she has attempted to sell her story to European media outlets. No one has been interested. Carlos Mendoza, the mechanic who sabotaged Sarah's brake line, was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder. He has become a model prisoner, teaching automotive repair classes to other inmates and expressing genuine remorse for his role in the plot. He has written letters to Sarah apologizing for what he did. Sarah has never responded. And Sarah Mitchell? She continues to run her foundation. She continues to fund cancer research. She continues to speak about her experience, not for fame or attention, but because she believes her story can help others recognize the signs of abuse and manipulation before it is too late. She has published a book about her experience, titled Locked In, which became a bestseller and has been translated into 17 languages. All proceeds go to Second Chance and to Locked In Syndrome research. She has been interviewed by major news programs, podcasts, and documentaries. She has been invited to speak at universities, hospitals, and corporate events. She has become a symbol of survival and resilience. But when asked how she wants to be remembered, Sarah always says the same thing. She does not want to be remembered as a victim. She does not want to be remembered as the woman who almost died. She wants to be remembered as the woman who heard her own eulogy and decided to rewrite the ending. In a recent interview, Sarah was asked if she has forgiven David. She paused for a long time before answering. Then she said, "Forgiveness is not something I think about. Forgiveness implies that what he did is somehow in the past, something I can move beyond. But what David did changed the course of my entire life. It took away my sense of safety. It shattered my ability to trust. It left me with physical and psychological scars that I will carry forever. So no, I have not forgiven him. But I have moved forward. I have built a life that matters. I have used my experience to help others. And that is enough." She was also asked if she would ever marry again. Sarah smiled and said, "I have learned that love is not always what it appears to be. That trust is earned, not given. That the person who promises to protect you might be the person plotting your destruction. So no, I do not think I will ever marry again. But I am not bitter. I am simply wiser." Sarah Mitchell is 58 years old now. She has gray in her hair and lines on her face that were not there before the accident. She walks with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the injuries she sustained. But she is alive. She is strong. And she refuses to be defined by what was done to her. She defines herself by what she has done since. This is the story of a woman who was supposed to die. A woman who was trapped inside her own body, unable to move, unable to speak, forced to listen as her husband planned her funeral. A woman who survived through sheer force of will. A woman who turned her trauma into a mission. A woman who proved that sometimes the only thing standing between you and destruction is your refusal to give up. Sarah Mitchell heard her own eulogy, and then she got up and walked out of her own funeral. That is the kind of strength that cannot be taught. It can only be lived. And Sarah Mitchell is still living. Before we end, we want to ask you a question. What do you think? Were there red flags that Sarah should have seen earlier? Could you have stayed calm and silent if you were trapped in your own body the way she was? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if this story affected you, if it made you think about trust and betrayal and survival, please share it. Because stories like Sarah's need to be told. They need to be heard. They remind us that evil exists, but so does the strength to overcome it. Next week, We will be covering another case that will leave you stunned. The story of a lottery winner who claimed $300 million and vanished 48 hours later. What investigators found in the basement of his suburban home will change everything you think you know about luck, greed, and desperation. If you do not want to miss it, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember that sometimes the person who knows you best is the person you should fear most.